I, like many people across the world, tuned into Tesla's AI 2022 presentation. I found the presentation incredibly fascinating, and while I did note afterwards that many people did not like this presentation or what had been said, my belief is that most of those people just do not really understand what just happened. What has happened to me, and to many others who most likely understand the nature of this technology far better than I do, is that confirmation has been given that an incredible new movement has truly started now, where the event horizon of the robotic age has finally been reached. What this means is that, while we have seen robots taking off as a workable and scalable technology to an ever-increasing degree in the last few decades, this presentation really means that a true and deep change is coming. We can no longer hold back a technology that has finally hit a culmination point. Tesla, and all of Elon Musk's companies, no matter what the critics say, really represent a kind of tipping point into a new reality, a reality where the scale of our technological advancement has reached a level where the next step, where the obvious step, is now possible at a scalable level. Think about it like this: the electric car was already possible. Indeed, it was not only inevitable, but it was the right choice some time ago. No matter where you stand on the subject, it is the case that there have been many different forms of locomotion available for a while now, that have been put to the wayside, stifled at times even, because there is a need by an established order to maintain that established order. But there always comes a time when the wave of the technological advancements possible hits a tipping point, and it is at this point when the crest of the wave begins to turn over, and such technology can no longer be held back any longer. The wave of the mass of it must crash. And by this crash of the wave, I do not mean that the technology is falling apart, but exactly the opposite. What I mean is that the mass weight of it now has enough momentum to carry it across, in a gravitational sense, into a new era of geometric growth and potential. This was the case with the electric car, and it took an innovative and agile company like Tesla to be able to turn the electric car into a truly viable, and most importantly scalable, technology. Certainly, there is much to do in this regard. There is still the need to increase such scaling so that the price of such vehicles lowers, so that the infrastructure required by such vehicles is developed to the point that everyone can use one. But you could say in many ways that the tipping point for the electric car has already happened. An inevitable crash of a wave has begun to occur, and the momentum of it would now be very difficult to stop. Tesla's AI 2022 presentation just announced to those that are paying attention that a new tipping point is now on the horizon. That new tipping point is robotics, more specifically in this case humanoid robotics, and the movement of this new cresting wave, being that the infrastructure for its development has already been set up, will happen very fast. I have mentioned the increasing rate of all recent technological advancement, by referencing to it as a quickening of the psyche, the development and expansion of the inner self of humanity. This quickening in the end represents the vast evolution of the inner self in the direction of an inner distinctiveness and expansiveness. Another way to say this from the inner alchemist's point of view is to say that, the ghost in the machine, which is the term that I use for this inner conscious and creative aspect of humanity, is developing, in some ways is being nurtured into developing, in a certain direction, and that direction can be perceived externally as that technological quickening. The inner aspects of this quickening, the parts that are the true foundation of it, the expansion and evolution of the inner self, are not perceivable by the physical senses, because the physical senses are not able to perceive the true energetic reality of existence. The outer physical senses can only perceive external manifestations, side effects, consequences, of that inner quickening. One such external consequence, perhaps the most easily perceivable one, is the increasing rate of our technological evolution. Humanity is changing, it is evolving. Even though the archaically established density of this world, the gravity of it, is stifling humanity as much as possible and locking it into a kind of energetic eddy, growth is still happening. The unfortunate thing is that this growth can be manipulated and controlled by those forces, which essentially means that our growth, our evolution is not a conscious one as it should be. It is instead reactionary, it is slow and directed into a purely material focus, and as such, all that could be possible for us, is now happening from an external point of view only. This latest new technological wave represents humanity's attempt to conquer yet another evolutionary hurdle, in a completely technological way. The humanoid robotic revolution is the technological and purely material way to overcome the friction of labor, and more importantly, in accordance with the subject of this video, it is technology's attempt to overcome the increasing need for personal assistance robots and companions. And while there might be a great deal of debate as to the speed of this robot revolution and Tesla's role in it, what cannot be underestimated is how quickly this revolution will happen. But what does this mean for the average person? Is it possible that certain inner techniques could be exploited to make this revolution even better in certain ways? Is it at the very least possible to balance this purely material evolution with a more spiritual one? In order to really know the answer to these questions, and the reason for a more balanced approach, we must understand what is happening to us at a deeper level. And to that end, I can say that we are evolving, humanity is changing, but the speed and the direction of this change may become quite problematic over time. As we are unconsciously forced to evolve, in spite of our conic friction, we are becoming more isolated, more like islands, more individual as opposed to herd-like creatures. This is a natural consequence of inner expansion, as I will explain, but due to the utter technological focus of the species, this increasing need for individual space is being hijacked and turned into a kind of technological dystopia. Some have said that in this new technological environment we are becoming more and more isolated, being that we are more focused on our technology than on each other. But this growing technological distance is a kind of half-truth, not real in a certain sense. Because even though our technology might seem to be allowing us to find space to be more creative, it is also limiting and controlling that space, and in many ways, it is corralling us instead of setting us free. Another way to look at this is to realize that we are beginning to use a different ranking in our perceptive scale. To explain this further, you could say that we are not expanding our perception really. At the moment, we are not expanding inwardly in order to match the vastness of our outer technological prowess. What we are doing instead is changing the priority of where we focus our physical senses, that is all. Instead of focusing our vision on the world around us, and expanding the ability of that vision to look inwardly, to look into new horizons and new dimensions, we are prioritizing instead the many screens that are growing in number all around us. Our vision is no longer as focused on the physical environment, let us say. Instead, to a greater and greater degree, it is being focused into the screen, and into a kind of new cyber reality. This is easy to see, and it may have a few hiccups along the way. That is, it may happen that at a future time, in accordance with certain particular trends, we might let go of screens for a little, but inevitably we are headed in a certain direction, that in the very best of terms, may lead humanity into hopefully a more expanded reality and awareness, in time. But, this inevitable trend, this current that is getting quicker, this quickening, that is being channeled at this time into material technology only, means that if certain trends continue, we will continue to focus into those screens more and more, so that instead of looking out more clearly, we will look into our screens, and in that way begin to shift our awareness in accordance to the nature of our technology. This shift will not be into the vastness of inner space and other dimensions with all their potential freedom, but into a controlled cyberverse. We will go inwardly, but we will do so, we are doing so right now, in accordance with technology, thanks to technology, and such bounded technological motion, at least from the inner alchemist's point of view, has some negative consequences. This motion inwardly into a kind of material version of an inner reality, which may be termed cyberscape, does not and will not just involve our vision, but it will also involve every single other physical sense that we use. We have begun to listen more and more through our headphones, let us say, and use our physical ears less and less to hear the birds and the bees all around us. And in that way we have not only begun to corral in a new way how we hear our external physical environment, but we have also been able to create internal environments, listen to entire symphonies that are not happening in the physical world, but that are happening in a kind of cyberspace, which is turning into a pretty limited vision of what true inner reality is all about. This will eventually apply to every single physical sense that we have, until there will come a point when there will be no real difference between cyber reality and what we now term physical reality, that is, the outer world in accordance to the nature of our physical senses. This is one particular direction of motion, brought about by that quickening and that technological revolution mentioned. But along the way, we will need to develop all sorts of other foundational aspects of our infrastructure, in order to make that complete cyber immersion possible. Of key importance in that technological motion is the ability to create a highly functional worker machine that can take over at least the most menial and labor-intensive aspects of physical reality. Such a motion has started, and it is going to be upon us far quicker than most realize. As I have said, as long as Tesla continues to develop at its current rate, the crest of this wave has almost been reached, and there is a great potential for growth, expansion, and freedom, as long as we maintain our sobriety. In other words, there is great potential and goodness in this technology. This technology can be an incredibly good thing, but we must evolve with that technology. Our inner reality must become as vast and complex as our outer one, or else our technology will become our prison. So, as these worker machines, these robots, become more and more complex at incredible speed, these worker humanoids will also start to become our companion robots. Such robots then will become essential in our development, because they will help us to transition into the more individual lives that have become the norm for many of us. The human development towards this individual nature, this more loner-like nature, is inevitable. As the psyche develops, as the intellect grows, there is a greater need for that growing individuality to spend more and more time within the ever-growing vastness within the self. This is actually quite healthy for the growing individuality, and indeed the nature of that individual change in the human species is remarkable to see over time. For example, I think most people would be astonished to note the difference between a medieval European and a current person. Using the inner senses, it is possible to focus the attention into that era, and what one can see is truly remarkable in many ways. During the medieval period there was an incredible richness to life that is unmatched in modern times, and the depth and the beauty of such a time for humanity had everything to do with a kind of gregarious communal connection that is impossible in the modern era. People in the medieval age were far less individual than they are now. People were far more reliant on external stimulus in order to dictate action, and the individual was far more herd-like in many ways. People clustered more, took individual cues from the group, and there needed to be a far richer physical existence. Another way to say this would be to say that the richness of that time allowed for the development of a far more gregarious, social, herd-like existence. From a linear time perspective, which is limited but still applicable in order to explain certain aspects of existence from a human point of view, there is a positive motion towards greater individual complexity. This growing complexity is happening slowly, but it is still happening, and the consequence of that growing complexity by the individual is that there is a quickening in technology, and a greater need within a person to find their own space, to make space for themselves and the growing awareness of their inner selves. A bigger and more complex mind means less gregariousness in some ways, and a greater need to spend more time alone. But there exists a certain trend, a developing one in this modern time, that could see a reversal in such individual self-exploration, one where a new cyber world may replace the complexity and the richness that were found in the medieval era, for example, and this could then mean a return to a more herd-like and reactive humanity. This is something that should be considered carefully by anyone interested in the expansion of the self and greater freedom. Such intricate development inwardly, into the material idea of the inner reality, which is the cyber reality, can take many different routes, and some of those routes can lead to bottlenecks. In accordance with the way of inner alchemy, the purely technological development of such a motion towards inner vastness, through the use of purely technological means, is the beginning of one such potential bottleneck. The basic reason for this is that all such technology, being that it is created by forces outside the self, that is, you are not creating such technology, you are getting it from somewhere else, purchasing it with the money, at this time in history, means that this way towards the inner vastness of the individual relies on an outer and commercially material tool. Inner alchemy says that such a motion inwardly should be individual from the outset, controlled wholly and completely by the individual, and reliant on nothing outside of the individual, so as to keep such motion as free as possible. In the best of terms, and being that open source software and hardware is becoming more and more accessible, such inner technological motion into the screen will hopefully allow for a balanced and liberated development along many lines. So that in time, such cyberspace might begin to open doors into true other dimensions, instead of just limiting the self by creating a controllable cyberspace, a kind of multifaceted cyberroom to lead and control the masses. But if this is not the case, in order to give greater variance, and therefore freedom, to that growing inner complexity within humanity, it is possible to combine the quickening of modern technology with the wisdom and power of inner alchemy. One possible way, and one that relates to the coming of the robotic revolution, which is the focus of this video, is the nature of the companion. As robots grow in complexity, now at an ever-increasing rate thanks to the technological power of Tesla, an offshoot of such robotic technology will be a development of the robotic companion. Currently we have seen an incredible growth in the need for pets of all sorts, that can fill the need for a companion as we separate as individuals more and more. But as robots grow in complexity, and their ability to become companions increases, as the ability of certain AI language models allows for more complex interactions between man and machine, these robots and this language model AI will begin to fill in some of the gaps that pets cannot. In order to offset that movement into a technological bottleneck, therefore, as an inner alchemist, I would greatly suggest that you also try to use alchemical techniques, things aside and potentially beyond anything possible even by developing technology, to empower your mind to do what we are now completely self-reliant on technology to try to do for us. For example, a companion can be created using purely mental techniques, using the power of the mind alone. It is possible for the inner alchemist to create a servitor, which is a mental creation, a kind of highly personalized thought form that can attain a kind of density, thickness, that can transcend that line between what is mind and what is matter. You can think of a servitor as being a kind of imaginary friend or servant of great power, one that begins as a purely mental thing but that in time can become more and more real, intensely real even in what we refer to as physical reality using the techniques of inner alchemy. As such, a servitor can indeed perform miracles from the average human point of view. So, more specifically, an inner alchemist can create a servitor companion, and these can provide all of the company necessary in those times when a person is alone, and is perhaps exploring the inner aspects of themselves, that growing inner complexity that can only be explored alone. And might I add, from personal experience I know that such a purely mental science, and such servitor companions, can far surpass anything technologically possible now, or in the near future. I mention this because it is not my desire to stifle this growing technological revolution, because there is indeed great potential in it, but to mention other methods, and to provide different techniques possible, that can either give greater variance, or even augment what is possible with just technology. In this way it is my hope that such a bottleneck can be averted, that such a return to the herd-like mentality and the superstition of the medieval era can be avoided. And the only way to do this is to help each developing individual discover their inner power, the power of their minds over just the use of external technological machines. Ideally, of course, the great goal is to develop the mind to the point that it is as powerful, or more powerful, than any external contraption. But this is a lofty goal and an impossible one for most of us. Instead, we can try to shoot for balance, and by balance I mean the skill to develop the mind and its abilities, so that it can begin to tap into at least some of the great potential within it. Such potential could allow an individual to remember far more than they could ever imagine, the ability to live in inner palaces of their own creation, and to perhaps even learn how to move beyond physicality and completely into other dimensional realms. Such abilities would then balance the mind, allow it to grow, allow the ghost in the machine to grow, so that a cyberpunk-style bottleneck could be averted. To that end, and in relation to the focus of this video, you could for example learn how to create a companion for yourself that does not require language model AI or a humanoid robot. You could use the techniques outlined in the book, create a servitor companion, to do now what future technology promises, and potentially far surpass such technology with enough focus and power on your part. All of this is possible without external contraptions and material technology. If you are interested in learning how to create a companion for yourself, one that can fill all of the many roles possible for a developing individuality, then I recommend the book, Create a Servitor Companion. I will leave a link to this book in the video description below.